I'll give you a brief outline of my presentation. Quickly, I just want to give a little background information regarding hydrogen sulfide gas and how it is created at the site. Then give you my evaluation of the different abatement options, and then provide my summary and conclusions. The hydrogen sulfide gas is being created at Fenimore. It comes from drywall or sheetrock. This drywall and sheetrock is mostly made from gypsum, which is calcium sulfate dihydrate. It's a naturally occurring mineral. It's very common, and as we all know in our homes, it's used for sheetrock ubiquitously throughout the United States. When this material, though, when it gets wet, the sulfate portion of the gypsum can become soluble in water. And once it becomes soluble in water, it is then available for bacteria to then consume. So what happens is when you have drywall or sheetrock, especially it's been ground up, so there's a lot of surface area associated with it, and it gets buried under the ground. What happens is the air that was originally around that sheetrock disappears, and it becomes without air, or otherwise known as anaerobic, in the absence of air. And when you have anaerobic conditions and naturally occurring bacteria that are below the ground, and you have gypsum that gets wet, then you have the ability of that bacteria to begin to consume the sulfate out of the gypsum and create hydrogen sulfide gas. And the three of those things are obviously present at this facility, and that is what has caused the odors that everyone has had to suffer through. Next slide. The records, a little factual information, records from strategic environmental partners regarding the facility. There's over 375,000 yards of fill material were brought into the site. Of that, over half of it were construction demolition debris fines that contain that gypsum, and about 60% of it came in before Superstorm Sandy. From my estimation, once that material is buried, it's a matter of only a few months before hydrogen sulfide gas begins to be generated. Once that gas is generated inside the fill, what happens is there's a lot of void space in that fill, and that void space originally has air in it, and then it gets displaced by hydrogen sulfide gas. And then over a matter of months, eventually all the void space in that fill area becomes filled with gas, and now that hydrogen sulfide has no place to go except into the air. And once it got into the air, then obviously that's when the odors started to show up, which my understanding were in the late summer and then especially into the fall, which makes sense with beginning of the hydrogen sulfide gas starting in the spring. Measurements that have been taken on the site, where samples have been taken of the gas inside the landfill, have shown hydrogen sulfide concentrations of up to 250,000 parts per million. That is 25% by volume, and that's an extremely high concentration of hydrogen sulfide gas. Next slide. So I was asked to review three options. I mean, conceptually, this is essentially what can be done with the facility in the current condition where it is. The first thing that you could consider is doing a targeted removal where you try to find the gypsum-containing materials, especially if they're concentrated in certain spots. Try to remove that and then cap what's left over. The second option is to remove all of the fill materials and just take it all off-site for disposal at some remote facility. And then the third option is to leave it in place and cap it. And then because it stays in place, you have to collect the gas that is generated and treated on-site. With regard to the first option, looking at the idea of targeted removal of the gypsum-containing materials, the first thing you got to ask is where is it? If we're going to do a targeted removal, it needs to be either in a fairly concentrated spot, or it needs to be maybe just on the top surface of the landfill so that you can skim it off. So the first thing I did is I took the records that strategic environmental partners were maintaining during the fill receipts at the site, and looked at where the gypsum-containing materials were placed. If you look on the site, with the little graphic that's out here, as you can see, the vast majority of the site took gypsum-containing fill 4, 5, or 6 months of the time. And as a result of that, it seems pretty obvious that these materials are scattered pretty much all through the site, both at depth and all over the site. So when you take a look at that, the fact that it's all over the place, I think it's pretty obvious to everyone that the idea of a targeted removal focused on gypsum-containing materials is not really feasible. And if it's not feasible, then there's no point in doing a cost estimate. I will be talking about cost estimates on our other two options later on tonight. Next slide. So we move on now to option 2, which is the removal of all the fill material from Fenimore and taking it to a landfill somewhere off-site and disposing of it there. And the reason I want to start with a photograph is that this photograph is what a pretty typical operation looks like when you are actually excavating waste inside of the landfill. As you can see in this slide, there's a lot of heavy equipment that's out moving material. You've got large excavators that are used to move it. You've got trucks that are coming through. You've got to create access roads for those trucks in order to get loaded. And the important thing to remember on this is that this is not like digging a hole. Digging a hole, you got a flat surface, and you get in there and it goes down. Those of you who are familiar with Fenimore, you know that it's built up. It's a mound that's been built up on top of the ground. So as a result, there are a lot of steep slopes out there, and the excavation is going to require those steep slopes, and uneven surfaces will be the fact of what it takes to remove those materials. So keep that in mind as we move forward. So as we then look in my analysis, next slide please, on my analysis of then what would be the result of when we have removal of all the fill materials. First thing is, we've already documented there are very high concentrations of hydrogen sulfide gas in this fill material. If you're going to excavate it and remove it, that hydrogen sulfide gas is going to get stirred up and it's going to get released into the air. That's obvious. You're digging things up, you're having to load it into a truck, and then it's getting hauled off the site. Those very high concentrations of gas, in my opinion, are going to make it very likely that the community is going to continue to suffer with some very serious odor issues that you've already suffered with previously on the site. And then the other thing that goes on from there is that once that hydrogen sulfide gas is loaded into a truck, all the gas that might be contained in those pore spaces is not released immediately. You can imagine it's loaded on a truck, maybe most of it comes out, 80–90%, but there's still some hydrogen sulfide gas stuck in the pore spaces of that material. That truck then leaves the site and drives down public roads to get onto a highway to travel off to a landfill. And hydrogen sulfide gas is going to be leaking out of that truck as well. So we're going to have odor issues, not just in the immediate area around Fenimore landfill, but you're also going to have odor issues in the access roads that lead from it as these trucks leave the site. With the very high levels of hydrogen sulfide gas you've got on the site, there are going to be some very extensive safety protocols required for the people that are operating, that are the construction workers on the site. I would expect that is going to require supplied air for everyone there. They have to have their own air supply lest they be exposed to that hydrogen sulfide gas. So you're talking about that for the heavy equipment operators and for the truckers once they approach the area where the excavation is going on in order to get their trucks loaded up. Well, all of that activity is going to really slow down the construction because of all of the safety protocols. So the net result of that is, I think, realistically, we're looking at about a 16-month period for what it would take to remove all of the materials from the site and truck it off to a landfill that's off-site. So this issue of excavation, of the potential hydrogen sulfide gas getting out, and odors will be lasting for that entire period. Another important thing to remember, there's an existing gas collection system that is out there right now. That system would have to be shut down in stages while this work is going on. So as a result, once that system is shut down, now your ability to control the gas that's in the materials that are left in the site before they're excavated, you've lost that ability to control that gas. So now we're looking at potentially having gas escaping the site, not just when construction is going on, but potentially having odor issues 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as a result of the fact that the gas control system also has to be shut down during construction. Well, one idea that can be thrown out there is, well, let's cover this excavation area, right? Let's get a temporary structure over top of it, and then we can collect the gas inside that structure and treat it before we release it out into the air. These structures do exist. They're typically